Hi 3D. Thanks for joining me for FLAT2FORM Inhabited Sculpture. I hope you realize how much your faculty miss you during this time, and I am far from any exception. I really wanted to create a project that would let you explore the concept of home, but something that was also equally accessible by using just materials you might find around your home to do our next project. This is important for a lot of reasons. One, first, for a level playing field. Not everybody has the same means in their domestic spaces. Some of us live in bigger or smaller spaces, and we may or may not have a stockpile of materials. So coming up with a media that was accessible was kind of paramount to this design. What I'm pitching to you is to design something from cardboard or chipboard, material that you find in your spaces, that starts flat, that then gets folded, cut, scored, bent, etc. into some sort of voluminous or volume-based mass, using architecture and the concept of home as inspiration. One of my favorite authors, an American novelist by the name of Toni Morrison, sums up, I think, our time quite well right now. This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. This is how civilizations heal. Why, some of you may enjoy the time with your family, others might be feeling a little emotional or trapped. You very likely could be feeling all of those emotions. Being at home can give a sense of safety, but we're also under a degree of quarantine, being required to be in our home space. And in turn, I want you to take a little bit of time to reflect on what the concept of home means to you. What is your dream home, or the shape or shapes you think of when confronted with the notion of shelter or domestic space? Materials that are available to you, I think, are first and foremost going to be cardboard and chipboard. That doesn't mean that you're not allowed to use other flat materials that could be easily manipulated into voluminous form, but I think the beginning focus should probably stick to cardboard and chipboard because I'm pretty sure this is going to be something everybody has. Traditional corrugated cardboard is pictured here on the left, with some samples of chipboard on the right. Chipboard comes in a lot of different thicknesses, but I think most of you are going to have accessible to you is cereal boxes, cracker boxes, and other food or beverage packaging that might include chipboard. Corrugated cardboard comes with a lot of different flute dimensions, and that just as far as the cutting and manipulation of the cardboard or chipboard, different materials might need to be in play. So as you scout your home for flat materials that you can erect into some sort of form, I want you to also think about the tools you might have on hand to be able to manipulate that, because you will have to adjust accordingly. If you do live in Richmond or are willing to drive nearby, I actually have a ton of extra cardboard in my garage, and I'm willing to lend you knives from school. But that doesn't help people at a distance, so you may have to scavenge your home or even ask for a neighbor to leave a utility knife outside so you can still avoid contact. Try and make use of the community and the things in your home. Very thin chipboard from cracker boxes, cereal boxes, and the like can probably be manipulated just with a pair of scissors. But for thicker boards, you will need some sort of knife. With X-Acto knife with a blade number 11, like that's pictured on the left, is common of what we use in the 2D design class on campus. The blade is sharp, allows for a lot of detail cuts, but can be a little unwieldy, whereas the utility knife, which is retractable on the right, has a trapezoid-shaped blade that you can actually flip, so you get two uses out of it. One thing that I'll stress, and I'll stress really hard, is threefold. One, I want to make sure you use sharp blades. You may find a knife, but if you don't have sharp blades, it's not going to be safe to cut. Two, a sharp blade is a safe blade. A sharp blade means you have to push less pressure behind the blade in order to get it to do the cutting job. If you have to push too hard to get it to do the cutting, if you slip, you're likely to injure yourself a lot more. Right now, it's all the more reason to take a degree of caution while we're working, because I don't want you to have to make a trip to the emergency room. Last, I want you to think about the rulers that you use if you are making straight cuts. Use a rubber back or a cork back ruler. If you don't have a metal ruler that has a cork or a rubber back, do not use a wooden yardstick or anything else to cut against. You can mark your cuts with a wooden yardstick and a pencil, but remove it and don't force the blade next to the wood. The blade will cut into the wood, and besides your cut being ragged, you run the risk of injury. Other potential media you might want to scavenge as you're looking around for things is, of course, scissors, those cork or rubber backed rulers. And by the way, if you have a metal ruler that just doesn't have a cork or rubber back, you might be able to line it with a few layers of masking tape or duct tape on the back side and see if it gives you any grip against the material. You also need some sort of backboard if you're going to be cutting using a knife. So some scrap cardboard or unfolding a bunch of old cereal boxes and laying them down before you make the cut, so you're not ruining tabletops or flooring. And by using a backboard, this extends the life of your blade. I'm going to say that again to be a little annoying. Using a backboard extends the life of your blade. So using that ruler with a cork or rubber backed and making sure you use a backboard when you're doing that cutting. Other assembly things you might easily have on hand is some rubber bands or other random elastic, hair ties, and the like. Tape, any kind of tape. You may be picking tape based on the aesthetic it could offer your sculpture, but at this point, beggars can't be choosers. We're looking for good craftsmanship, but we're also looking for appropriate craftsmanship. Craftsmanship that reflects the time and the spaces that we're in. I understand that we're all going to have access to different things, so I'm going to be really flexible in the way that I evaluate your project in lieu of that. Also, I think what might be helpful is string, rope, thread, and other cords. Thinking about popping holes in cardboard and tying together sections instead of having to glue or tape them if you don't have those materials on hand. Zip ties, the plastic variety, or twist ties, the sort of metal bands that you use to tie clothes, a bread bag, or a garbage bag. And last but not least is kind of an inclusive category of paint, texturing media, and drawing media. You may opt to let your cardboard sculpture or your chipboard sculpture just to remain cardboard or chipboard. A lot of the samples I'll show you today are exactly like that. You may decide you do want to paint, texture, or draw upon, or even collage on the surface of your material. That's more than welcomed as well. For some of you, it might be easy to treat the surfaces of your cardboard before you cut and assemble a form. For others, you may not know really what you want to do to the surface until the end, so you don't need to jump the gun necessarily. This is work by an American artist who's now located in the UK. His name is Joseph Delap. I had the privilege of exhibiting with Joseph back in 2015 at an exhibition called Manifest Justice. Joseph is a political artist, but he does a lot of collaborative work and 3D design. So a lot of these pieces start out in a computer model being generated and then turned into actually physical sculpture after the fact. This work is called Liberty Weeps, and it's actually probably about 8 feet tall. Here's a few in-progress shots of Liberty Weeps by Joseph Delap, again done back in 2015. You'll see on the left how they've scored partway through the board to actually create the folds. Now, when folding along the corrugation, you actually don't need to cut the board. The cardboard does want to crease when it's parallel to its corrugated guts. However, if you need to make a fold that's perpendicular or runs against the grain of the corrugation, you're going to need to score it ever so lightly with a blade of some sort. This shot with the ladder on the right gives a good sense of the scale of Liberty Weeps. It's quite domineering, as our Statue of Liberty has her face planted in her palms in tears. Joseph also has done other political works made out of cardboard. I'm trying to focus today on artists that are using cardboard in conceptual ways, so not just for its affordability, its environmental friendliness, and its accessibility, but also artists that are bound and determined to make that affordability, the accessibility, and the environmental connotations that go along with it reflect also a great deal about its concept. This work, called Thoughts and Prayers from 2018, is a cardboard rifle. The audience is able to walk around the entire form because it's just laid on the floor. As you guys move forward with your work, I want you to think a little bit about where you install your cardboard or board sculptures. One of the things I'll refer back to throughout some of the other slides is trying to kind of motivate you guys to think about where the sculptures are going to be placed. You're working in your home, so you have access to your domestic space, but you probably have access to the outdoors in one variety or another. Even if you're in an apartment, there might be an external space outside that is not competed by a lot of other people, so you can still maintain social distancing even though that you want to move outside to photograph the work. Time of day when you photograph is also still going to be really important. When I grade, I am going to take into consideration your documentation, but that's not going to be the number one thing. However, your good work is only reflected well to myself and your classmates if you document good work good. That could probably be the mantra for this project. One thing I want to point out about the tip of this rifle by Joseph Delap in Thoughts and Prayers is it's a pretty good example of seeing cuts that run along or rather parallel to the corrugation of the cardboard, and also cuts that run perpendicular to the cardboard. You guys are probably not going to have full 4 by 8 foot sheets of cardboard, so there's going to be some pre-existing bends in it that you're going to have to work around or with. My recommendation to all of you is adapt and then adapt again. I need you to be agile and flexible as you progress through the stages of this project. It is undoubtedly a weird project, but my goal was to create something that was truly reflective of our time and something that would not cost you any money to create. Now, this is another work by Joseph Delap called Taliban Hands. This is 3D printed though, so this is not folded cardboard like a lot of his other works. I wanted to include it though as sort of a way to help define the word facets, which is one of the vocabulary words for this project. Facets is an F-A-C-E-T-S. The facets on the surface of this are not unlike cut gemstones, diamonds, and the like. It reveals how a computer model might scan and simplify form when it only has basic mathematics involved. This material object connex, I'm not totally sure what it is, but I think it is a hard, dense plastic used in 3D modeling. Now, as a total contrast to the hard geometries of a lot of Joseph Delap's work that's utilizing geometric forms to create surfaces, Warren King's series, Grandfather's Friends and Arrival Times, are figurative forms made out of cardboard. Now, these are much more organic and curvilinear. I love these photographs too, besides them documenting his ancestors well in this series back from 2016 and 2017. I think it also shows off how you can make the internal guts, the internal corrugation of the cardboard work for you to create curvilinear form. Here's another work by Warren King. Now this is a freestanding sculpture, but it starts to verge on installation since it's beginning to take up a whole room or a whole environment. You can't really walk into the piece, but you can walk fully around it. When thinking about architecture in reference to a 3D design project, I can't help but think of this famous quote by Winston Churchill. "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." What does he mean by this? Churchill was a war hero and a politician and a natural leader and one of the world's best orators. That said, he was not an architect. We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. A designer steps forward and designs a space, a building in this case, and then that result shapes the way the people use that space. I like this sort of conceptual ramification, thinking about how our designs, even in studio arts and even in graphic design, actually have an impact on the use of the audience and how that information is consumed. Wanted to include some of Mika Nyson's work because of the laminated aspect. By lamination, I mean that these are layers of cardboard that are glued. This creates a lot of extra weight, but it also gives the piece a lot of structure. So in some cases, this is actually stronger than some of the other works that we're looking at today. This series is back from 1995, and I'm assuming that it's probably just regular glue between each layer of cardboard. Now, if you decide to laminate cardboard or chipboard for your project, there's one of two ways you can approach it. The first is to cut each shape as you go and laminate it in order. This can be more time consuming but physically less daunting because you're not struggling to go through many layers of cardboard at the same time. Now, if you opt to actually laminate up many layers of cardboard before you cut it, you're asking for a bit of a how can I explain this? You're asking for a bit of a hurdle in terms of construction because without the proper tools on hand, it can be dangerous to try and cut through that many layers at the same time. In that realm of lamination, but these pieces are more vessel-like because there's negative space, there's an internal gut and an airiness to it, but these are still laminated, are by Tobias Pitry. Excuse my pronunciation of his name. This macula series B is cardboard and glue again, but yet these are like open vessels, so I want you to think of them as giant vases in space. If you look carefully at the image, you can kind of see the internal side through it. And that's because you actually can see through the guts of the corrugation. One done by Balnug Studio is a desk. This is actually a piece of furniture. It looks like it has a plywood top, but in this case we get a very curvilinear, organic, full of movement desk facade in the furniture design. So these forms, it almost reads like hillsides here in Kentucky or waves on top of the ocean. In preparing for this project, I stumbled across the work of Lindsay Elliff. A lot of the work that I'm showing you today is by designers, architects, and artists that are still alive and working. A lot of the quotes that I'm providing are by people that have passed, but I kind of want to focus a lot of the imagery on creators that are still out there making work. I've done my best to create captions for each of the work, but also in the notes you're going to notice that there is some links that you can click on to articles or websites that I found some of these pieces located on. Now with Illiff's work, this particular piece titled Jacob's Ladder, this was painted after the form was made. Now, if you choose to use a wet media on the surface like watercolor, acrylic, any sort of paint that has a water content to it, not spray paint, for example, you need to take a little bit of care to not supersaturate the cardboard when you're painting the work. If you supersaturate that cardboard, it might get soggy and fall. And the whole thing that's kind of interesting about Lindsay's work is how gravity defying a lot of these pieces are. And you can click on the link to her website to see a lot of other basic geometric constructions that might be of interest to you. Now, when you're thinking about glues for assembly, I know I've bad-mouthed hot glue, but right now, honestly, anything goes. If you clean and you glue properly so that we don't see the strings of hot glue unless it becomes an integral part of your design, I'm all for it. We have to use what you guys have accessible already. I want you to avoid going to a store. I want you to avoid having to spend money online. So these are all important attributes for me as you move forward to the project. You will be rewarded to see how well you adapt given our current situation. Another Lindsay Elliff piece called Yellow Cluster. More yellow acrylic. Now when I look at this work, I see plain bald cardboard in between each of the folds. So this leads me to believe that the board was painted prior to her slicing and dicing it. This other kind of gravity-defying piece called Small Spiral by Elliff I included because I like the plinth at the base. She's thought about the weight of the piece, how it's going to arrange in space, and in this case she's chosen to include some sort of basic form. I want you to think about how that circular disc that's about an inch or so high was actually created. This piece overall is a little over 30 inches tall, so that base is probably no more than about an inch, 2 inches deep, tops. My suspicion is that besides cutting a perfect circular disc, which is 9 inches in diameter, she then cut a thinner 1 inch tall strip that could be adhered to the bottom of it. But my suspicion is that there's some cross braces of cardboard underneath, if I was to make an educated guess, that are helping keep the weight of that piece erect. That base, without some sort of internal armature to help hold it up, might wear out and cause the piece to sag. Now again, these pieces are all cardboard. They're not meant to be particularly archival. Cardboard has a lot of acid content to it. Acid in cardboard is what causes the material to age, yellow, and get flaky with time. So these pieces are not precious in the traditional sense. To talk a little bit more about surface on different works, I found this series of painted sculptures. I'm going to completely butcher the artist's name, Mark Grotjan. Grotjan's pieces, these look like pretty plain tall cardboard boxes, kind of similar to the size box that we actually just received a treadmill in a couple weeks back. By the way, again, I'll reiterate, I do have some cardboard on campus and I have some cardboard here at home. So if you guys live nearby and you're really hard up for cardboard, I can actually leave cardboard outside Campbell or cardboard outside my house, and you can drive by and pick it up without having to see anybody in person. I was really drawn, for obvious reasons, I think, to the painterly surfaces on Grotjens' work. In this series, you can tell that it's cardboard. The flaps at the base of the boxes are actually what's helping keep the piece erect. They do take on a very monolithic architectural form. It probably helps that these works are installed up on pedestals, so a piece that was tall already is now even taller, but the surfaces are particularly appealing. I want you guys to be able to have a lot of room for expression and interpretation in this project. So if you find yourself to be really interested in color, paint, and other surface qualities right now, this is a chance that you can kind of embrace that, and I hope you'll consider it. This pavilion, constructed by Shigeru Ban for the Abu Dhabi Art Fair back in 2013, was kind of interesting to me, and it pointed out some other material options I think I was overlooking when I initially thought about this project. Besides, you may be having access to cardboard around the house. You may also have access to some mailing tubes, paper towel tubes, toilet roll tubes, anything that could give you some extra structure, height, or assembly capabilities. This space, I also think, reflects pretty interestingly on the positive and negative space. So the scale of it is inhabitable. People can actually enter the architecture, be shaded from the elements. It's, of course, not a very archival work. One rain, this piece would start to slouch and lose some of its structural integrity. On that solid wall to the right, those cardboard tubes, a lot of them are left open, so you can actually see through the space, but a lot of them have caps on one, if not both sides, which not only acts as a design element, but would probably change the way that the wind blows through a space such as this. An artist I didn't discover until I began researching for this project for you guys is Nina Lindgren. She's based out of Stockholm, Sweden, and the Floating Cities series I thought was interesting for a couple of reasons. One, she was able to create a lot of scale, get a lot of mass, but using small, scrap-like material. Most of you are probably not going to have giant appliance boxes to have the structure of a larger sheet of cardboard, but you are likely going to have access to lots of smaller cardboard boxes, cereal boxes, cracker boxes, and the like. This work by 2013, back from 2013, definitely reflects architecture, but it very much has an urban aesthetic, almost an urban sprawl aesthetic or shantytown aesthetic, where cities become overpopulated and one thing gets built upon another and built upon another. I like seeing the slightly different tonality of the different cardboard, different thickness of cardboard. Here's another image of one of the same projects in that series. She's chosen to make these windows in the space, which give a little bit of negative space to the form, but their peculiar small scale isn't just kind of visually interesting as a mark if I was to evaluate it just purely on the aesthetics alone, its visual merit. But I think it's kind of interesting because it insinuates an even larger scale. Windows are typically large enough for a face or a torso to be in, but these windows read a lot more like prison cells or something smaller, so it suggests that this form, again, is even larger than what it is. I would focus on, as you're sort of scavenging your domestic environments for material, don't worry so much about coming up with an idea and then finding the specific material in your home. I think it's smarter for you to look for the material that you have access to and design around that. That might bum a few of you out, and for that I apologize, but I think it's just going to be a smarter way and a more embracing, kind of nicer way to be to ourselves in this process. I want you to have fun and be experimental with this project. You're at home. Ideally, these projects are a welcome distraction for you. At least I hope they are. That's what I keep telling myself. But using Lindgren as maybe a point of departure really kind of takes advantage of all the smaller materials you may come across that then could be constructed into something larger. I have no specific scale requirement for this project, but I do have a certain thought requirement. These works are going to be conceptual in nature. You're broaching the concept of home first, reflecting on that, maybe even meditating on it at risk of sounding a little cheesy, and then seeing what you come up with. I think one of the biggest highs we're going to get together as a class, as a result from the sculpture, is to see the diversity of output that you create. Up until now, we've been working with either very similar material or similar themes, whether that be that small scale and plaster of the tactile handheld, the lighting core concept that we used for the Kunstlich project, and then the wearable sculpture concept we used for Abundant Couture. Now you have a departing concept, but the results we're going to get back together as a group are going to be ridiculously diverse. I think that's going to be to our advantage, and to be very much something to look forward to. This quote by Constantine Brancusi, a Romanian sculptor: "Architecture is inhabited sculpture." Now, Brancusi is the guy that I showed you during our very first project that did the muse pieces, those abstracted faces, those stone, almost egg-like stone forms with abstract facial features on them that were laying on their side, or faces that were being cupped in their hands. These are a couple of the pieces that Brancusi is most well known for in the back. These are works that were installed, I think it was in a retrospective in the Guggenheim in New York. And I point out the Guggenheim because it's actually a famous building designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It's that spirally museum in New York City. If you haven't been to it, you've probably seen pictures, but feel free to click on the link and explore the Guggenheim's collection. As you guys are working towards your second mini review, I've been posting a lot of virtual museum visits to the Facebook page. I copied some of those links and I put them into the mini review assignment, but the Guggenheim is one venue you might look into here on the right. Brancusi's work, I think one of the reasons he stuck with me so much from my time in undergrad and why I'm showing him to you guys today is he was really kind of all-inclusive. So besides utilizing basic geometries, which I think can be a healthy starting point for a lot of us with an architecturally inspired project like FLAT2FORM, he was also really known for building in the pedestal and plinth as part of his work. He didn't separate it. The pedestal and the plinth wasn't an afterthought. It was an integral design feature from the very first moment. And that's maybe, I suppose, kind of an idea I want you to walk away with from looking at his work, is if you are making what you would consider a sculpture for this project, a standalone, non-inhabitable, abstract sculpture, for example, for your FLAT2FORM exploration, I would maybe want you to think a great deal about how it's installed and where you install it. How do you photograph it? Is it outside? Is it inside? What time of day do you photograph it? Is it hanging on the wall? How do you attach the sculpture to the wall? Is it freestanding on the floor? What floor do you place it on? How does it come in contact with the space? Back to this sort of notion of footprint. I can't help but thinking about footprint when I think of Brancusi's work. Not because the footprints themselves were so amazing, but the way that it claimed space, because pedestals and plinths were not simply just an afterthought, but something he integrally designed into the work, becomes really important to me. I'd also argue that these particular pieces on the right, those ones that are a mixture of wood, stone, and concrete, they're actually quite figurative. That was intentional, that they're reminiscent of faces or body parts. Also, I think just that vertical scale of the piece reminds me of a human standing up. Some more cardboard examples. This pupa. This is a side and interior shot of it. In the background, you can see a couple of the chairs there. If you click on the link of the website, you'll see about 7, 8, 10 images of this particular installation in the Bloomberg headquarters. Now, these triangles that he's created the work at, some of them are capped, particularly in the interior side, but I want you to examine just one triangle. Looking at these surfaces, looking at just one simple triangle, look at the flaps. Look at that little triangular tab on the inside guts. Now, what did this shape look like when it was flat? My suspicion is that there was one long rectangle that was then folded to be an equilateral triangle. Equilateral being a triangle with 3 equal sides. Back to our basic geometry here. Don't ask me to explore beyond that. I can't remember all the differences without looking them up myself. However, when I look at the internal guts, I know on the inside he's capped it if you look back at the previous image, and I see some little folds there. So my suspicion is that The long rectangular shape that was folded into the triangular form, it had a little bit of a tab on it, which is that triangle flap you see on the inside that was glued to secure the shape. But then another triangle was cut just a little bit smaller so that it could fit on the inside of this. And those are the little small flaps you see folded over. One of the video links that I provided for your guys' review was a video of a collaborative project called Project Another Country by husband and wife duo Alfredo and Isabel Aquilizan. Again, please forgive my pronunciation if I'm butchering any of these names. This cardboard and mixed media series, these particular ones are hung on the wall. You can see the one on the left is sort of latched over a shelf on the wall and built around that. I like its integration into the space. I like its architectural significance, but again, a lot of you guys are going to take much more abstract approaches to this notion of home. What you end up creating may or may not look like a traditional architectural form, and that's okay. In these particular forms, I have a feeling that this cardboard has been treated with shellac, maybe paint or coffee grounds or dirt mixed with water or clear acrylic to create the surfaces on it. Feel free to explore and have some love with the cardboard, but you might want to experiment with your surfaces on scrapboard before you actually attack a finished form that you've created from cardboard. In the video of Alfredo and Isabella's work, you're going to see that's very community oriented. They work with a lot of people to create these pieces. Here's another image of larger installations by the Aquilazans. Now, they were originally from the Philippines, but have lived and worked all over the world. I think they're actually currently living in Australia working, but don't quote me on that because, again, I kind of view them as almost nomadic in nature. I think that they were so important to this assignment to include their research because they are literally directly exploring the notions of home and travel. We're at home right now with an inability to travel. It's been recommended that we don't travel right now. I think this is a really interesting point of departure, and as well as Nina Lindgren's work, I think this is an interesting example of how dynamic and exciting you can make something out of cardboard to make something in a significant scale if it's so desired, still having access to only very little parts. The final quote I'm going to leave you today is by Aldo van Eyck, a Dutch architect who passed away in 1999. What you try to accomplish is a built meaning, so get close to the meaning and build. This project is intentionally meant to be not antagonizing, but it is meant to be different. It is meant to be thoughtfully challenging. It is meant to be conceptual. We're in this weird shared circumstance of being at a distance, but for a lot of us, for the very first time, we have things in common with people that we may have never met before. We have things in common with people that live completely across the globe, not just across the city or a state. This is kind of an interesting point of departure for me to think about as a maker, as somebody that's interested equally in studio art as I am design philosophies and architecture for that matter. I think as an artist, if I wasn't a visual artist, that I might have really enjoyed being an architect. So there's a little bit of internal bias built into this project design. But as a way to kind of emotionally navigate our current situation, does it help us to, as Van Eyck mentions, get close to the meaning and build? I started with that Toni Morrison quote, kind of to embrace this idea that this is what artists do. We get to work, we make. We get close to the meaning and build, in Aldo van Eyck's statement. I want you to have some fun. I want you to know that grading will be flexible. If you work hard on this, if you show that you're genuinely being explorative and thoughtful about what you create, if you try to take decent documentation of the work, you'll do okay. I don't mind working you hard. I do mind grading you hard in this situation. And I'll say that again. I don't mind working you hard, but I do mind grading you hard right now. And hopefully that gives you a little bit of a peace of mind and perhaps more importantly, some freedom to explore the subjects involved with this project in a more heartfelt and deeper way. Regardless on whether you go into art and design as a permanent career field, you will occupy spaces, you will have homes, you'll have future careers, You'll live in different spaces, and this is something it's interesting to delve into and unpack. Don't hesitate to reach out to me for meetings, for video conferencing. I will be reaching out to each of you one-on-one to request a little video meeting for perhaps 15 to 30 minutes in the course of this project. It's not due until April 15th. Look at the reading that I've attached. Look at the video links. There's 3 of them. One of them is audio-based, so you can probably scroll through that one a little bit faster, but do watch the other 2 completely, please, and thank you. If you have questions, please send me an email. I look forward to fielding your responses, to seeing sketches as needed. Be in contact, and I will reach back with you as quickly as possible. Thanks, everybody. Have some fun. I wish you well.